Hi everyone, how are you doing? I hope you're all fine. I see that we have 10 people here right now. Okay, while we are waiting for someone else to connect with us and watch us live, I will start to introduce myself. My name is Maria Perez Tejuela and I'm a trainer at Capture One. First of all, I wanted to welcome you all to this webinar and thank you, of course, for watching, and thanks to Cyberphoto for hosting us once again. So this is a continuation of the first webinar session that we had here a couple of weeks ago at Cyberphoto's YouTube channel. It was about getting started with Capture One, and we walked through the interface and we saw some of the nicest features and some of the coolest tools of Capture One. And seems that you liked it, and Cyberphoto has asked us once again to do a second session for you. This time we are doing live edits. So if you haven't ever worked with Capture One, the Getting Started with Capture One webinar that is right here at Cyberphoto's channel, recorded for you to watch at any moment, it's a very good option to do so. No, unfortunately, I'm not speaking Swedish. I'm sorry for you. I'm from Spain, so I can't speak Swedish, unfortunately. So I hope that you can all follow me in English. So as I was saying, if you haven't watched the previous webinar, I welcome you to do so. It's here at Cyberphoto's YouTube channel. So I hope you will excuse me for my language, and I hope that I can speak slow enough for all of you to understand me. So I wanted to start by explaining the session today. Today, as I said, we will do live edits. We have 60 minutes, so I thought to dedicate 50 minutes to the live edits and another 10 minutes to some Q&As, so to answer some of your questions. Also, if you have any questions about the edits as we go, I will try to answer them as soon as I finish each of the photos. So this webinar will also be recorded and it will be staying right here at Cyberphoto's YouTube channel, so you can watch it at any minute. You can ask your questions. We will do some Q&As, as I said. And also here on the chat where you can ask your questions, you are very welcome to interact with each other. And there is also our colleague Michael from Cyberphoto, who will be with you also in the chat, trying to interact with you and trying to answer some of your questions. So before we begin with the webinar, I wanted to remind you that we have a 25% off promotion going on that is expiring right today. So if you were thinking whether to get your license or not, today might be a very good day to do so. Of course, you can get your license from Cyberphoto's website, and we even created a hashtag support your local dealer, because you know that right now, with the times we're living, it's really important to support local businesses. So you're welcome to get your license from Cyberphoto, post it on the social media, and use this hashtag support your local dealer. So I think that we can begin with what I prepared for you today. So I have here some session that I prepared for you with different raw files, and I hope that we will have the time to see them all. As you see, I prepared a little bit of everything. This is already edited. This is what I wanted to show you today. So this is the images that I prepared. As you can see, there is a bit of everything. There is some landscapes, there is some portraits, and there is also some still life right here. And there is a different idea behind of each of these edits. I will try to explain the intention and the purpose of this all, so you can all follow up with me. So I wanted to start by this image. As I said, this is the edited version. I will just share my screen now, so you can see everything, all the tools. So I will say goodbye to you until the end of the webinar, until we do the Q&As. So for a moment, you will only see my screen. So there we go. Okay, so as I was saying, this is the first image that I wanted to start with today. This is a typical landscape image. We have this kind of nice fog right here. But if we take a look at the raw file, it's really different. So remember that to see the before and after, you just come up here to the reset button and you hold Alt key, and you can just press and hold reset for the before and then just let go for the after. So this is what we started, and this is where we're going to start actually today, and this is where we're gonna get. So I'm just going to start by resetting this picture. You can see here the raw file. And the idea here is to try to, we don't want to get rid of this fog, because I think it gives a really nice feel and atmosphere to this image, but you can see that there is a bit too much of it in the background. We're losing detail in some of these trees, and we want to of course recover some of the detail as much as possible from here, from these shadows, these trees. So let's start by doing that. So there is a workflow that I really like to do in Capture One, which is to do all my edits in layers. So I will just come up here to the layers panel and I will create my first layer before even doing anything to this photo. So there is a plus here, I just press and hold, and I have different options for different kinds of layers. I will start with a fill layer. It pops right here. And remember, it's a fill layer because there is a mask that is covering the whole of the image. So I press M, which is the shortcut for show and hide mask. And you can see there is this mask covering the whole of the image. I click M again to just let it go. And I will try to be tidy and I will try to always name my layers. This is really important if you're working with many layers. So I will just call it adjustments. And this will be the basis where I will start all of my edits. So first of all, let's take a look at the histogram right here. We can see that all the information is a bit to the left. Remember that the histogram is the graphic representation of what's going on in the image. And we want to keep it on the center and we want to make it as wide as possible. So I will just start by lifting the exposure a bit. You can do this by the sliders or you can do it just like I did. Just clicking there and with your up and down arrows. And I really like to do it in this way because you can be very precise. So I think we will be fine around there. And probably the next thing to do here is to play around with the high dynamic range tool. I really love this tool in Capture One because it allows you to recover a crazy amount of information, just like this. Of course, we don't want to leave it here. Let's try to be subtle and let's try to think what's going on here. We want a sky with a lot of detail, but we don't want to do it so exaggerated like this. Let's try to keep it reasonable, somewhere like there. And let's try to lift the shadows up a bit. Let's see what we can find here. You can see that there is actually a lot of detail here in these shadows. So the thing here with the high dynamic range tool is that when you are lifting the shadows and getting down the highlights, you will find yourself with a kind of flat image like the one we have here now. So the next thing we want to do is we want to play around with the contrast and with the white and the blacks. So let's try to make this image pop up a bit, something like there. So I think that after playing with highlights and shadows, the next thing you want to do is you want to increase the contrast a bit, just like here. And then we can also be more precise by adjusting the whites and the blacks just a tiny bit. And something that you will find yourselves doing many times is just playing around with the shadows and the blacks, because when you get down the blacks, you will start to lose detail again, which you can just recover again with the shadow slider. So I think that would be a nice starting point. And it's really important to just keep comparing the before and the after and see where we came from and where we are now. So I think that's giving it a real nice effect, but of course there is still room for improvement here. So let's go back to talking about this haze that I said before in the beginning. We have this nice haze, we like how it looks like, but it's just a bit too much and it's making us lose some details here in the background. So there is a perfect tool to do this in Capture One, which is the clarity. So let's try and increase the clarity. Let's see what happens. I will just go a bit over the top right now, just to show you how this works. In the clarity tool, we have different clarity methods. So we have the natural one by default, and we have the punch, which is perfect for this kind of image to just recover some of the detail to dehaze. And what it's doing also is increasing the saturation a tiny bit. And this kind of clarity, it's good for landscapes exactly because of this, because it increases the saturation a bit too. We have also the neutral or the classic mode, but I think that for this kind of image, just punch will be perfect. And you can see the before and after also of each of these tools. So there is a little arrow here, like the one up there. So if you press and hold Alt and you go back, you can see the before and the after or each of the tools. This is a bit too much, so I will just tune it down a bit. Okay, I think that it would be around there, the effect that we want to achieve for today. So the good thing of having all of these adjustments in a separate layer is that I can just turn on and off all of these adjustments just by layers. And you will see now that we will create more layers to keep working with color, and it will be really useful to do it in this way. And also I like to work this way because we have the opacity slider. So if I have the opacity slider and I feel that I went too far with any of my adjustments, I can just tune down the opacity of the whole layer, and I can choose to stay in any point in the middle. And I think that this is super useful. And this is why I prefer to do all my adjustments in layers, even if I could just work on the background. So I'm happy with my exposure adjustments right now. So the next thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to work with color a bit. And in order to do that and to keep a tidy workflow, I'm going to create a new layer. So I come right here and I start to create a new fill layer again. This, you know it's filled because you press M and there is the mask again. And this one I'm going to call color. That's it. So the first thing that I want to do here is probably to increase my saturation just a bit and try to give it a nicer feel, something like there. 10 points will be fine. And there is also some other color adjustments that I want to do here. And in order to do that, I will just move here to my color tools tab. Remember that we have all the tools in Capture One divided in separate tool tabs, and that we can just switch from one to another in order to access the adjustments that we want to do. So all the color tools right here in the color tool tab. And there is this fantastic tool that we have in Capture One called Color Balance, and I really love it to work with color, and it's so useful, especially for the people who are not so used to work with color. And I like it so much because it's really intuitive and because it adds a really nice atmosphere and look to the image without being so complicated. So we have different modes of color balance here. The three-way, it's just the way that shows you all of these three color wheels. This tool is based in these three color wheels that are working for the shadows, for the midtones, and for the highlights. And what we are doing here is to give them some tint. It works exactly as color correction works in video. So another thing that is so cool about this tool is that there is a simple adjustment that works 90% of the times, especially with landscape images, which is just to cool down the shadows just a bit. So you just click the tint right here and you just increase the saturation on the left side there. So something like there, and you can see how it starts to cool down the shadows. And we go over now to the highlights, and you can just come over here, choose the tone that you want to add to your highlights, and increase the saturation, just like this. So let's see the before and after of this color layer. You see that it's creating a really nice feel, and we did a really simple adjustment. So I think that this tool is really great in order to do this, and it works amazingly for landscape photography. Again, we can have the opacity slider just to tune down this adjustment a bit. And I think that this image would be almost there. There is just one last thing I want to do with it, which is to add a vignetting. In order to do this, we could do it from the background, and we have a vignetting tool right here. In the exposure tool tab, we have a vignetting tool, and we can use it just to add a simple vignetting. But the thing is that we don't have so much control of what's going to happen here. So there is another way to do vignettings that I think it's more accurate, which is also from the layers. So I'm going to create another layer to do my vignetting. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer, this time an empty one. So remember, press M, nothing shows up. That means that it's empty. And I'm just going to call it vignette. There. And right now, in my new layer, I'm going to choose a radial gradient mask. We have here all of our brushing tools. This is the brush, this is the eraser, linear gradient, and this is the radial gradient that we want to use now to create all vignetting. So once I selected the tool, I can just come over here and draw my vignette in the way exactly that I want to. And I can just make it to affect the part of the image that I want to affect. For example, I wouldn't like it to go too much on this nice tree that we have here in the background. So let's do some shape like this. So I like to see my mask while I'm drawing the linear gradients. And when I'm finished, I click M again and off it goes. And I will change my tool also to stop seeing this vignetting tool. And right now, because it's in a different layer, the only thing I have to do is to come over here to the exposure and brightness tools and just reduce the exposure just a tiny bit. And maybe also a bit the brightness. And I think that we can leave it somewhere here and we can see the before and after of this layer. I really like to add vignette in my landscape photos because I think it really adds a nice feeling of depth. So we have the color here and the general adjustments here. And we can see the before and after of each of the layers. And of course, we can see also the global before and the global after. And this is the process that we can follow in order to achieve some result like this. You can see that it was nothing so complicated that we did here. It was made with really simple tools, and despite Capture One has a bunch of advanced tools to work with color and to be very precise, you don't always need to use them all. You can always stick to the basic tools, and you will also get a nice result. So let's move on to the next of the image that I prepared for you today. And we have this nice cat here. It's one of these hairless cats, and I really like the way that they have so many of these textures on the skin, on the neck, and on all of the top of the head here. I really like how this works, and I thought to do it in black and white just to empower a bit of these textures and to get the most out of them. So this is the result that I want to achieve, and right now I'm just going to reset this image, and this is the original raw file. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to do some cropping and to center the attention on this cat, on these nice eyes and these huge ears. So I will just grab my cropping tool from here, from the toolbar. If we press and hold, we can see the different aspect ratios that we have. For this time, I think that I will just keep it on the original aspect ratio. And let's try to focus, as I said, the attention on this nice kitty. So in order to apply the cropping, you just hit enter, and there it goes. I think that we can just remove it a bit. Okay, I think that's fine. We could try to do a color edit too, but I just think that it will be better in black and white. So you could just start to work with color ranges and start to give it some contrast by there. But for today, I just wanted to jump straight to the black and white tool, which is right here. And we can just enable the black and white. Please keep in mind that I didn't do it in a different layer because right now the black and white tool, it's not supported in layers. It's one of the few tools that is not supported in layers. So we will always have to do our black and white adjustments on the background layer. So once we enable the black and white, we can unblock all of these sliders of color ranges, and this will allow us to work with the contrast through the color ranges. So let's see what we have here on the red range. So we can see that the red is basically moving the contrast of the skin of the cat. So we probably want to just tune it down, go down on the red, because the objective here that I want to do is I want to highlight as much as possible these super big, nice eyes that this cat has. So I think that it's the best thing to just tune down the reds. Let's see what is on the yellows. So on the yellows we have also skin tones. So same as the reds, let's just tune it down. Let's leave it somewhere there. Let's see what's on the greens. Nothing on the greens, we just leave it to 0. And then on the cyans, yeah, as you can see, on the eyes, we can start to have some more information, just like that. So I'm going to go up on the cyans and just try to make these eyes pop up. Also, the blues have information on the eyes. Can you see the pupils, how it's changing? So I'm going to also go up on the blues. And on the magentas, let's go back to the whole of the image. The magentas, it's some information here on the ears and also on the eyes. So let's see what's happening on the eyes. In this case, it's also affecting the eyes, but I will just keep it down because otherwise we will have a much of a narrow pupil and we don't want this to happen. So let's just keep it somewhere there. Okay, I think this is a very nice starting point to start to work with our image. Let's just see the before and after of the black and white tool. And you can see that it gave it some really nice contrast there. So now that I have finished with my black and white tool, I can just jump on to create a new fill layer like I did before. And just to call it adjustments. And in this way, we can start to work with the contrast in another tools. So let's go to the exposure tool tab. And because we're working black and white, I normally like to do my black and whites really contrasted because we don't have the color information and we need to add some interest somehow. And contrast is the way that we have to do this. Let's take a look at the histogram. It's a bit to the left, so I will just leave the exposure just a tad. Somewhere there. Yeah, something like there. It's nice. Let's try to recover some of the information here on the ears. although it's not even near to overexposed, but maybe we can try to get back some bit of detail there. Okay, and we can go just a tiny bit up on the shadows, something like there, not so much. And I think that in order to increase the contrast here, instead of doing that with the contrast slider, I will just use curves. For black and white, I prefer to use the Luma curve because it's not affecting the color channels and it allows you to be very, very precise in the contrast that you're applying. The Luma curve is something genuine with Capture One, and I really like to use this Luma curve. So let's just create a bit of contrast using this curve. So if you're not experiencing working with curves, this is the part that represents the shadows and the blacks, and this is the highlights and the whites. So I'm just lifting up the highlights a bit, going down on the blacks, something like there. And I think that really gives a nice effect. Probably also we can do with some clarity here. Let's just add a bit of clarity. Let's see how it affects here on these textures. So let's see the before and the after of the clarity. I think that works in a really nice way to highlight this contrast. Okay, I think that this starts to look nice. There is also something else that we want to do here. As I said, the whole idea of this edit is to highlight these nice eyes. So let's work in a different layer now. Let's create another empty layer and let's work on these eyes a bit with very simple adjustments. I'm just going to name it eyes. You can see that there is nothing coming up on this layer. So I will just draw a mask myself. And I will draw a mask on these eyes and I will try to add some extra sharpening and to get some nice textures out of them. So I come over here to my layers panel, I choose my brush, and this is a bit too big, so I will just make it smaller. You can work with the hardness and the opacity also. I think that for today we want to keep the opacity at 100%. And let's just draw a mask on these eyes. Let's hit M to see what we are drawing. And let's just try to create a mask as accurate as possible for these eyes. Something like there. We could always take the eraser and just leave out whatever that we missed. Something like there. And let's move to the other eye. Let's grab our brush again. And once again, we brush into these eyes. And what we're doing to do here is to add some additional sharpening. Okay, I think that will work fine. We can see that we have a very nice mask on these eyes. I hit M. And let's see what we can do with this. As I said, I want to add some sharpening, but I think that structure would also work well here. Structure is next to the clarity slider, but it's a bit different. Remember that what clarity is doing is adding contrast to your midtones, while the structure, let's just exaggerate this a bit, it's adding micro contrast. This gives the feeling of nice textures here wherever the mask is affecting. This is a bit too much, but if we keep it to some lower level like this, I think it can really work well. Let's just see the before and after. There you go. That's very nice. So this combined with the sharpening will create a really nice effect. So let's jump over to the sharpening tools right here on this tool tab. And let's add some additional sharpening. Not so much, something like there. Let's see the other eye. Let's just see both of them together. And let's just reset the layer. That's the before of the layer. This is the after. Can you see? I think it really gives a nice effect. So there we are. I think that's starting to look pretty well. But there is something kind of annoying here, which is this little hair or something like that. This little spot that we have here next to the nose. And I think that we can get rid of it in a very simple way, just by using the healing layers. We haven't talked about healing layers yet, but it's over here in the layers panel. We have, if we press and hold, we have different kinds of layers as you saw before. Besides empty and fill layers, we have also the clone layers and the healing layers. The healing layer, it's kind of a healing brush, what would be the equivalent in Photoshop. It's a bit more limited for now. Let's hope that it will be improved in the future, but I think that it will be useful to just get rid of this spot right here. So let's just call it spot, this layer. You cannot do any adjustments on the healing layers. It's just meant to clone out all of some of these defects on the image. So the way to work with this is you grab your brush. Let's just make it a bit bigger, something like there. And you just draw a mask here in whatever you want to heal. And Capture One automatically selects a point, a sample point for it to replicate. This time it's not so accurate, but we can just move it and put it wherever we want to, something like there. Maybe there, something like that's fine. And then we can just switch tools. And I think it really did a really nice job. So it was this spot before, and this is what we have now. And it's a very simple adjustments that we can do straight from Capture One, and maybe we just don't need to go to Photoshop to clone something so small like this. So I think that for this kind of spots, it works really well to do it with this tool. I think we're almost finished here. I just wanted to do one last thing on this image, which is to create a vignetting. And in the same way as I did before in the landscape, I can just create an empty layer. I will call it vignette. And I'm just going to grab my radial gradient mask and I'm going to draw my vignette. Remember, hit M always to see what you're doing, what you are affecting on the image. And you can just create this vignette. And there we are. But what I'm going to do now, instead of going down with the exposure, would be some effect like this. I think that we can do this in a more refined way. And I think that we can just play around with the whites because we have a very white background and it's getting a bit too much attention. So let's try to do it a bit not so white. And I think that the great way to do it is with the levels tool. And this is the white point in the level. So if we take this point down here on the right and we grab it and move it, we can increase the whites. But some other feature of the levels tool is that you can just grab the point up here, and when you move it, you're doing right the opposite thing. You're taking information out of the whites. So you can create some effect like this. This is the midtones, which you can also play with. And something like this, I think it's more subtle than just reducing exposure, and I think it just gives a nicer feel to this image, to this nice cat that we have here. So let's see the global before and the global after. And I think that's really nice. This is what we were before, and this is where we are now. And I think that we totally did this kind of feline feel with some really nice, big, mysterious eyes. So I think that I'm done with this photo for now. Maybe we could just increase the exposure just a tiny bit more. Something like there. Okay. Now I'm finished with this photo. Remember, if you have any questions regarding the edits, you can just post them on the chat and I will try to answer them as we go. So let's jump to the next example. For this example, I have a portrait here. Okay, and this is a portrait taken with Fujifilm, and you will see why this is important in a moment. So this is part of a 60s fashion editorial, and we have some kind of retro vintage look that we want to highlight in this image. So the edit that I thought about was just some greenish tones with some pastel that reminds us of this kind of retro feel that we want to achieve, and even it's some kind of cinematic look as well. So let's try to combine all of these ideas together in an edit that fits the image. This is the edited version. This was the before. And let's see how we get there. So let's just go ahead and reset this image. As you can see, the first thing that I did here is also cropping, because this is a really big crop, and I think that it just takes a bit of the attention out of the main subject right here. So I'm just going to take my cropping tool and I'm going to recrop this. I'm going to try and center my attention on this model. So enter to apply the cropping, just a bit more to the left maybe, somewhere like there. Okay, so I have my cropping, which is my starting point. And then it's important to think what it means that this portrait is taken with Fujifilm, because we have in the base characteristics here, we have the camera that took this image, Fujifilm GFX 100, great camera. And it's something that we don't need to worry so much about because the Capture One will always grab the camera from the metadata of the image. But here in the curves, when we are working with Fujifilm, it's something that we have to mind because, surprise, we have here all of the Fujifilm film simulations, all of the original ones, right straight from the camera. So, I really love Fujifilm RAW files because to start out with something like this, it just gives you such a nice starting point, both for color and black and white, and it's just great that you can have such a good starting point to work with your image. So the first thing that I want to do is to select some of these film simulations and choose it as a starting point. And as I said, I want to achieve this 60s retro look, and I'm going to look for something, okay, there it is, that suits my mood. I think this Astia film simulation will be great for that. So this will be my starting point for this. So, and also keep in mind that film simulations as are applied to the raw curve, it's not supported in layers too. It's just supported in the background because it's the basis for the whole raw edit. So I have my cropping, I have my curve. Let's move on to create the first fill layer, which as always we call adjustments. And it's a fill layer, and there we are. And let's just start by working with this image. The first thing I want to do here, as I said, I want to achieve this retro look. I think that we want to switch this mood a bit green to the greens, because what happens is that we have this retro look associated with some green tones, with some pastel tones, and this is exactly what we are going to try to achieve here. I think something like that. We don't want to go too far on the skin tones either, but we also don't want to do it so realistically. So something like that, let's say it's nice. And I think that on the Kelvins we are fine. Okay, so let's try and add some contrast to this image. We have also the Luma curve for this, and it's useful to do it on the Luma curve. Let's just see what happens when let's just compare, and let's see why the Luma curve is so important. So I just clone the variant. For this, I just right click on the browser and I can just choose my clone variant. And this is really useful to compare different edits because you have the both versions right here. So what I'm going to do is, first I'm going to apply an RGB curve like this. And you can see that we are adding contrast, but what the RGB curve is doing is also saturating a lot. Especially, it's saturating the red a lot, like really a lot. And this gives some kind of a natural feel on the skin, which we don't want to achieve. Well, let's do this on the second variant, on the Luma curve. We can see that it's not playing around with the saturation. We compare both of them. We can see that this gives so much more the look that we want to achieve here. So for today, I will just delete this variant and I will just say and work with this one. Maybe now it's a bit even too unsaturated, but it's not a problem because we can always correct that here from our saturation slider. So let's just go up with the saturation, something like there. Okay, I think this is a nice starting point. And maybe because we decrease the black so much, we are lacking a bit of detail here, so we can just recover the shadows. Not so much, because there is nothing so interesting here. There is nothing adding so much relevant information. So we can just keep it somewhere around there. And I think that's gonna work as a background layer. So let's see the before and the after. And it's so much closer to what we want to do. Maybe it's just a bit too contrasted. Something like there. Let's see now. Okay. I think that this is so much closer to the look that we want to achieve, but I'm not going to give up on this just now, because we have an issue here with our skin tones. So we have really nice skin tone here fitting the mood, but what's happening here on this hand is that we have a different color of the skin, and it's really normal, it's really natural that we don't have exactly the same skin tone on the faces and on our hands, and models are no exception to this. So we want to probably work a bit on the skin tones on the hand, but without affecting the skin tones on the face. So let's go ahead and create a different layer. This time is going to be an empty layer because I'm going to be working with the local adjustments. and let's call it hand. The mask that I will be drawing here is a radial mask because I think it really fits the shape of the hand. And it doesn't matter that it will affect also some things in the background because we were going to work with a color selection now. So let's create the mask. And the radial mask is not only useful for doing vignettings, you can also just come over here to the layers panel. You can right click on the layer and just invert the mask. And in this way you can use it to just work with your different objects on your frame. So let's adjust this mask. Let's make it a bit bigger. So I said don't mind the background because we will just do a color selection in a moment. Okay, that's exactly what we want to do. Let's go and hit M. Let's go and change tools. And we are right here with our hand selection. And in order to correct the skin tones, I'm going to come over here to the color editor on my color tool tab. And we have, if you remember from the last session, some different color editors. We have the basic, the advanced one, and the skin tone. So the most logical thing, I guess, would be to just come here and select my skin tone editor and just grab this dropper and select just a color sample from here, and it will automatically create a color selection right here. But the thing that is happening here is that the skin tone is optimized to work in a very subtle way with the skin tones, okay? So even if we change the hue to the top of it, we still see a difference between the skin tone on the hand and on the face. So I will just come back here in a moment. And before working with the skin tone editor, there is a way that I can correct this from the advanced editor first. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my dropper from the advanced color editor and I'm going to select a color sample. And right now I have here my color selection and I can just click on this button here, view selected color range, and that will help me to understand what is happening here on this color selection. And we can see that it will gray out everything except from the color we selected. Don't mind so much this because remember we are working on a mask, so this is the area we are affecting. And we don't need to take this into account, but we have to keep in mind that there is some skin tones here that we did not select and we want to add them to our selection, and we can do this just by opening this a bit more. And that would be better. You can see that right now this is not grayed out, and that means that we will be working with the whole of the hand. And right now we can just change our hue, and you can see that the advanced color editor is working with the color in a much more aggressive way than the skin tone, and this, in this case, is going to be useful for us because we have a great color difference and we can sort it out just like this. Something like there, it's much closer, it's fitting much more with the skin tone. We might want to desaturate it a bit. We don't want also the hand to take too much attention from what we are doing. And maybe also reduce the brightness just a tad. Something like there. Okay, maybe a bit more of green. I think that starts to work much better. If we see the before and after of the layer, this is the magenta tone that we had before, and this is the tone that we have now, so much closer to the face. But let's just not leave it here. Let's grab the skin tone mode, and let's grab a sample once again. Viewer selected color range, we make sure that everything is in the selection. Just in case, let's open this selection a bit more. Okay, and once we've done this, we can retune this and we can be now very precise because we have a good starting point, and we can just tune the hue a bit more to the greens. And we have also these sliders here, very useful for uniformity of the skin tones. So we can just make the skin tone more uniform, make the saturation more uniform, and with the lightness, normally I don't want to play because I like to do this from my lighting in the capture. So something like there, I think that would be fine. Probably, yeah, something like there. So let's see the before and the after of the hand mask. You can see there is such a difference in what we are doing here, and I think this is so much better like a starting point. So I would say that we are almost done here. We haven't played so much with color because we started with the color profile, with the color curve from Asia film, which is fitting so much the mood of this image. But what I'm going to do, instead of just creating my own color balance, is I'm going to work with some styles and presets that I have right over here. So this is the tool tab where we have all of styles and presets. There's some built-in styles and presets that you can use. In my case, I have some user styles that I downloaded, and I'm just going to work with my editorial color grading styles, which I think are great for this kind of shots, of these fashion shots. And we have here different kind of presets that we can use and that are going to work well for this shot. Something that I really like to do is not to add my styles on the background layer, but to add them on a new layer. And we can do this in a very simple way. Let's just find one that suits it. Green pastel. Okay, I think this is it, the green pastel tone. So instead of just clicking there, I'm just going to right click on it and I'm going to apply it to a new layer. And like this, if I go back to my layer panel, we can see that a new layer was created here. It's a fill layer because it takes the whole of the image. And the good thing of doing this in layers is that we can just, of course, tune down the opacity of this style and stay in any point that we like. So maybe I'm going to stay around 70%. Something like there. Maybe the hand is a bit too unsaturated, so I'm just going to increase my saturation from here just a bit. And if we want to achieve a more realistic look, we can always tune down the hand a bit and just to blend in with the original file. And that's going to work fine with most of our image, just to keep a balance between the layers opacity. And I think that will be all for my 60s editorial shot. And if we see that before, this is what we were, and this is where we are now. I think that we perfectly achieved this look right here. Okay, so I'm going to jump over to my last photo of the day, which is this nice landscape. So there is something that I wanted to show you about this photo. For that, I'm going to jump over to my library and I'm going to deselect this filter that I have here. And I'm going to show you, okay, this is the final result that we want to achieve with all of our edits. This was the before, and this is what we want to achieve. And right now I'm just going to reset it. And I'm going to show you where this image comes from. So this image is part of an HDR sequence. So the whole idea of shooting a series of images like this is to create different exposures. This one is for the sky, this one is for the midtones, and this one is for the foreground. And the whole idea to shoot 3 images like this is just to combine them in an HDR file. Okay, but sometimes we just prefer to keep one raw file, and we can just work with one raw file and achieve the same result as with an HDR blend. Okay, and the fact it's that just by using this one file, we have all of the information here really, and I'm going to show you. So this is the file that we chose to work with. It's the one in the middle of the sequence. So I'm going to show you how all of the information that we need is here. And this just by tuning down the exposure, we can see that there is all the information in the sky. And if we go crazy up with the exposure, we can see that there is also much detail here that we want to take advantage on. And always that the information is on this raw file, we can always bring it back with Capture One. We just need to have it on the raw file, and if it's on the raw file, it will be fine. So let's take a look here at the base characteristics tools. This was sold on Nikon, so we don't have any nice film simulations, but what we do have is the raw interpretation curves of Capture One, which are going to be really useful here. So this is the basic adjustment that Capture One is doing to the raw file once you are importing these files into Capture One. And by default, it comes on Film Standard or Auto, which is normally Film Standard. But there is also some other curves that we can take advantage of for this kind of image where we have a really wide dynamic range. So there is some curve that I wanted to use today, the linear response. And as you can see, if you compare the linear response curve with the Film Standard curve, is that we are gaining so much information from the sky. We are gaining so much more information from the sky, and don't mind that it's a bit too dark here, because as we saw before, the information exists and we just need to bring it back now. So this will be my starting point for this photo today. And let's move over just a moment also to the lens corrections. Sometimes lenses on Capture One are adding some corrections by default, and this is why I normally don't use the correction of the lenses, because it depends on the brand if they are already added. And the lens corrections in Capture One are really fine. The profiles as they are created, they are really fine. So we don't need to work with that normally, but as we are really missing some information here, I think it's a good idea to just correct this light fall off. Let's try to bring back as much of this vignetting as we can. And that's going to be a good starting point for us to work. Okay. So we are working just in the background. I will just bring the exposure up just a tad right from the background. And I will just play also with the white balance right from the background, and I will just make it a bit more bluish. There is a feel in this image that we want to highlight, which is we have some nice sunset right here, and we want to highlight these bright orange tones of the sunset, but at the same time, naturally, it's creating a gradient effect here in color, so this is much cooler than the colors here, and we want to highlight this effect. So let's just try to start from a cooler point of view and just make this a bit more warm into the magentas, somewhere like there. I think this is a good starting point. And we're going to jump straight to layers editing. We're going to do different layers and try to bring back as much of the information as we can. So let's create our first layer. This time is going to be an empty layer, and we're going to work with the highlights. So I'm just going to call it highlights. Sorry, I misspelled there. And the approach that I did here is I'm going to take my radial gradient, because the area of the highlights, it resembles pretty much a circle to me. So we will just start by doing this. Let's hit M, see where we go. And we need to invert this layer. So let's just create a mask that will cover all of these highlights that we want to take so much back as possible. Okay, there we are. So I'm just going to bring down this exposure a bit, and I'm going to also bring down the highlights a bit. And I think that is a great starting point. If you remember, I'm just going to clone a variant here for you to see the before. Okay, this is where we started, and this is where we are now already. This is where we are now already with very, very few adjustments. So I think this is a great starting point for this. I'm just going to move on to my shadows areas. Just going to change tool. I'm going to move on to my shadows areas, and I'm going to do that through a new empty layer. And I'm going to call it shadows. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy the mask from the highlights and to invert it, because what it's not on this mask is pretty much what we want on the other mask. So I'm just right clicking on it, and I'm copying the mask from my highlights. No, sorry, I didn't do it. So I'm copying the mask from my highlights, and then I will just invert the mask. And this is exactly what we want to do. And I'm going to do the opposite adjustments. I'm just going to lift my exposure up here, only on my shadows, something like there. I'm going to go up on my shadows, recovery, and maybe just a little bit on the blacks, not so much, because we don't want to create too much of a natural feel, or we don't want to bring so many halos into this image. So something like there. I'm just going to reset a bit of this gradient, something like there, because we can see that there was some halos showing up here. And something like this, we can just have more control of where this mask is going. So I think that's better. And this is where we are now. I think this is so much better. Probably the highlights are just a bit down, so I can just reduce my mask opacity just from here. And I think that's so much better. Okay, let's just keep going on. I created a new fill layer. And now what I'm going to work with is the saturation and the clarity. And I'm going to do this in different layers, because this time the saturation and the clarity, I want them to affect the whole image. So again, I give it a name to my layer, just to make sure that I am doing the right thing in each one of them. And I'm just increasing saturation, something like there, not so much, something like there. And I'm going to increase my clarity too and try to get some nice volumes out of this. So I always like in my landscape edits to just check always each of the clarity methods and see which one goes better for my images. I think that the classic method, which I don't normally use, somehow is the best for this image, and I'm going to stick to this one. Something like there. I think that's nice. I think this is a very great basis to work with. We could leave the image here, and I think this is a valid edit for me. But whatever that we're adding from here, whatever that we are doing with color, I think it will just improve our mood and feel of this image. And that's exactly what I'm going to do now. So let's go on, let's work with color, and let's try to highlight this difference in colors that was created naturally in a very nice way. So we have the sunset, the orange tones of the sunset here, and we have the blue tones here. So this is what we want to empower here. So let's create a new empty layer. I'm going to call it warm tones. And guess what? I'm just going to copy the same mask again from my highlights because it's exactly the part of the image that I want to affect. So that's my mask. And I can just warm it up. You see that I'm not doing any crazy adjustments here. So I'm just working with the white balance, with the clarity, with the saturation and tools that I'm sure all of you know. So something like there. We can even increase saturation just a bit more here. And I will use a curve also to get some nice contrast out of these clouds here. Let's see what happens when we do it on the Luma curve. This is probably not the best adjustment to do on a Luma curve because in here, the RGB curve will give us a very nice saturation, extra saturation that we can use probably. So I think that works better. As a rule of thumb, the RGB curve is better to work with landscapes and the Luma curve is better to work with portraits and skin tones in general, and black and whites also. So I think maybe the global saturation is a bit too high, so I'm just going to reduce the opacity of this layer a bit. And going back to my warm tones image, maybe this is a bit too high now. I can just go down on the opacity, and that's why I'm creating separate layers. And maybe I just want the mask to be a bit broader, so I can just modify my mask in any minute. I just need to grab my gradient tool and just make it a bit wider. And if we see the before and the after of this, I think that is working really nice. I think I'm really happy with this. And there is something else that we can achieve here because we managed to bring back a lot of information from this side of the image, but these rocks here, I think they're still a bit dull, and there is actually much detail that we could still recover from here. So there is a perfect tool for creating this kind of mask in Capture One, which is called the Luma range, and I'm going to show you how this works. So it's important to work with Luma range that we always start from a new field layer, because Luma range is modifying a mask that is already existing. So I'm going to name it rocks, and this is my mask that already exists here. And right now I'm just coming over to this button here and I'm clicking my Luma range tool. So what do we have here? This is a range of the brightness of the image, and with this tool we can just mask the image according to how bright things are. So on the right, this is the whites and the highlights, and I can just keep them out of my mask in a very simple way just by doing this. And I can just keep the area of the image that I want to mask, and of course I can just go all the way down to my blacks, to the real blacks here, and I can just be very precise in what I want to mask, and I can create really hard mask here without investing so much time. So I can just increase the fall off to make a natural look. And in this kind of mask, I also like to increase my radius because that it's going to affect the feathering of the mask and it's going to create a nicer feel. And we want a really smooth mask over here. And I think that we are there. It doesn't really matter that it's not perfect fitting there. We could always also use our brushing tools to refine it. But I think that this is just great because I'm just going to lift up the shadows and the blacks a bit, and that's going to look fine, I think. Okay, so I'm applying my luma range. I think something went wrong here. Okay, there. That's it. I'm applying my luma range tool. There. Okay, right now I can click M, and I can just start to work as I just drew this mask, but with much better. And you can see how the detail on the rocks is starting to show up here in a very nice way. You can also feel it here in this piler, and you can see that it's not giving a weird effect or anything. It's just working in a very natural way. We could also even increase the blacks just a tiny bit. We just don't want to go too far on that, but I think that's looking great. And if we see the before and we see the after, you can see that it's adding really nice feel over here. If we take a look at how the mask was done, you can see that we have some information here and some information here. And if we set it before and after, we might not want to increase the amount of detail here, for example, or on the bridge. But don't worry, because we can always take our eraser tool. Let's just increase the size and reduce the hardness a bit. And we can just take these things out of the mask in a very simple way. With the flow, you can control also very precisely what is affecting your mask and what is not, and in which degree. So in here, we don't want to probably get rid of the whole mask, just reduce the opacity of that part just a bit. So I think that's working better now in a very natural and nice way. Just one last thing I want to do here is I want to increase the saturation a bit of this bridge, because I think that will really give it a punch. So I'm going to do this through a color selection. But to do it in the most simple way, to not create any complicated mask, I will just create a new fill layer. And I'm going to call it bridge. I hit M, everything's there. And I'm just going to jump over to my advanced color editor, right here. And just as before, as I did with the hand, I just take my dropper and I will select the color that I want to work with. If I see the selected color range, we selected all of these reds. And don't mind this selection on this way here on the right side of the image, because we are not going to we're going to leave it out of the mask in a minute. So we have a red selected, and right now we can just increase the saturation. As I said, don't mind the right side of the image. We just want to take a look here on the left, and we might want to increase the brightness just a tiny bit there. So this is horrendous, I know. Let's just take it out. Let's just take our eraser tool and let's just increase the flow to the max, size a bit down, and we can just very quickly delete this from our mask all the way here and make sure that we don't have anything weird staying there. We can just hit M and make sure that nothing is affecting the outside of the bridge. And don't mind the rest of the mask, because it's just not red, so nothing's being affected by this color selection. If we just think that we went a bit too far, we can just reduce the opacity there up to, let's say, 80%, more or less, something like there. And I think we're almost done here. I'm just going to increase again a bit of the global saturation. I think that's it. I think I'm happy with how things are right now. Oh, look, there is something red here. I can just remove it with my brushing tool. And like that, it's not being affected anymore. So, I think this is it for today. I think this is the final result. Let's see the before and the after. This is the before. This is the after. You can see that we really had a lot of information in only one raw file. And we can just get as much detail as if we combine 3 different files on an HDR, but just in a much simpler way, just working with one single raw file. Okay, I think that's it for today. Let's just jump on to the questions and answers. I'm going to go back to you on my screen here, my webcam. Okay, I think that someone's asking, could you do a round showing what each layer do? Yeah, of course, let's just see. Let's just do this from the beginning. and just deselecting all of my layers. Remember, this is the background where we just increase saturation a bit. No, not saturation, sorry, exposure a bit, and we just change to the linear response curve from the raw file. And we have the background here. Then we tuned down the highlights. Then we brought up the shadows that did a lot to the image. Then we had the saturation and clarity layer, the warm tones layer, the rocks, and the bridge. And this is the sum up of all these layers that is creating this result. Okay, do we have any other questions? Maybe you're just a bit shy? Okay, no problem. So, is there anything else that you want to say? Meanwhile, you are thinking if there is any more questions, I would like to remind you again that we have a 25% off promotion going on that is expiring today. So if you are thinking to get a Capture One license, today is the best day to do it because the promotion won't be running tomorrow. So the 25% off is for 3 kinds of licenses: Pro, Pro Fujifilm, and Pro Sony, and you can get it from Cyberphoto's website. And if you do it, please tag us on the social media. You can use our hashtag support your local dealer. I'm not sure if there's any other questions. Right, I don't think there are any. I'm just giving it just a bit more of a second while I say goodbye to all of you. So I wanted to thank Michael for being there on the chat, although not so much interaction, but thank you, Michael, for being there, and thank you, Cyberphoto, for supporting our Capture One webinars. Thank you, everyone, for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that overall it was useful for you and that it showed you some nice tricks to work with Capture One, and that you learned some useful things. If you haven't tried Capture One yet, there is a free trial version for 30 days that you can use. And I do invite you to import your raw files there, to do some testing with your own raw files, and you can see that it's offering you so many possibilities. Okay, since there are no more questions, I think I will just be saying goodbye to all of you because we have the time now. So, thanks for watching again, thanks to Cyberphoto again, and I hope to see you again on the next Capture One webinar. I hope that you will follow along. So, see you next time. Bye!